Welcome, everyone. My name is Xiomara Rodriguez, and I am the Communications Director for Discover Puerto Rico. Thank you for joining us for our August industry update. Today, we will share information about the latest research, marketing, and sales strategies we have developed in response to the current COVID-19 pandemic. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's industry update will be translated simultaneously into Spanish. Also, today's presentations are available in Spanish on our industry portal, puertoricodmo.com. So you can download the slides and follow along. La presentación del día de hoy tendrá subtítulos o closed captions en español. Si usted desea activar la función de subtítulos en español, oprima el botón etiquetado Closed Captions en la parte de abajo de su pantalla. Elija la opción que dice Show Subtitles para ver los subtítulos en español. Si desea ver el tracto completo de la traducción, puede seleccionar la función que dice View Full Transcript. La presentación que utilizaremos el día de hoy está disponible en español y puede ser descargada desde nuestro portal de la industria puertoricodmo.com. After the presentation, we will have time to answer questions, but feel free to send your questions as we go by using the Q&A feature, which is the bubble labeled Q&A at the bottom of your screen. During today's industry update, you'll hear from our CEO, Brett Dean, Secretary of the Department of Economic Development and Commerce, Manuel Lavoy, Puerto Rico Tourism Company's Executive Director, Carla Campos, Research and Analytics Director, Alicia Valentine, Chief Marketing Officer, Leah Chandler, Chief Sales Officer, Ed Carey, and Miles Partnership Senior Vice President, Nate Huff. Now, to get things started, I'll leave you with Discover Puerto Rico CEO, Mr. Brett Dean.
Saludos from your DMO, Discover Puerto Rico. I hope that you, your loved ones, and your team are safe and healthy. It was almost 5 months ago that we entered into the first restrictions related to COVID-19. And like you, I never anticipated we would be discussing COVID in August. But as we've seen here locally and throughout much of the United States, this crisis is far from over. Last month, in our July industry update, we shared our plans to revive tourism and accelerate the economic recovery of our industry throughout our island. These plans were developed using research, current data, and industry best practices. And as we prepared to implement those plans, we were very encouraged to see a positive response from consumers, meeting planners, travel advisors, and trade media. Unfortunately, those plans had to be delayed due to the recent changes in government policy. Nevertheless, you can be certain of this. Your DMO, Discover Puerto Rico, is prepared and eager to begin marketing tourism again as soon as it is safe to travel and our island is ready to welcome visitors again. Your DMO will act swiftly and proactively to spread the word about our reopening to outside visitors when the time is right. And your DMO recognizes that local tourism businesses are facing extremely challenging times, and we must do all we can to help you put people back to work as soon as it's possible to do so. Until it's safe to travel again, we will continue to carefully communicate the current situation, the guidelines, and the travel restrictions in place so our future visitors know what to expect and can plan accordingly. As you know, Discover Puerto Rico is not a governmental entity, and we do not make public policy at the airport or elsewhere. However, we do strive to work closely with our partners in government and throughout the entire travel and tourism industry as we carry out our duties. Because the main questions and issues that our industry faces today are not marketing or sales issues, we thought it might be helpful today to dedicate some time to hearing from key partners in government so that we all have a solid understanding of what is currently taking place and what to expect over the next several days and weeks. And of course, you'll also hear from our marketing and sales teams on how we are approaching this current situation. I know these are challenging times, and I recall from my days of running a business in our industry how frustrating it can be when your business stops serving customers and experiences financial pressures. Only those who have lived through that can appreciate what you are facing today. But don't lose faith. the resiliency of Puerto Rico and its tourism industry are widely recognized and highly regarded. And in terms of 2020 and 2021, Discover Puerto Rico will do all we can to help turn the second half of this year and 2021 into something more positive. If this were a baseball game, we're in the fifth inning. If this were a soccer match, it's halftime. Better days lie ahead for all of us. So hang in there, stay strong, and don't give up hope. Together, we are going to rise above this challenge and write yet another amazing comeback story. And now it's my pleasure to introduce a leader who plays a key role in guiding our economic recovery, the Secretary of the Department of Economic Development and Commerce, the Honorable Manuel Laboy.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you for this invitation from Discover Puerto Rico to participate in this industry update. Certainly these are challenging times, so my objective today is to share with you some key data in terms of what has been happening in Puerto Rico associated with economic development, where we are with the pandemic, and trying to finalize my presentation with a positive note and a sense of hope, because I believe, like just Brad mentioned, that we're gonna recover from this and we're gonna do it stronger than ever. So I'm gonna be sharing my screen, and this is gonna be a presentation that is gonna guide my message this afternoon. So Puerto Rico's economy, as you know, has been going through a lot of challenges for the past 20, 30 years. And one of the things that we're focused, the Department of Economic Development and Commerce, is to grow the pie that is being measured as gross domestic product. And we want to do it in a way that is sustainable. And in addition to that, we want to diversify the economy. And we have realized from the get-go that one of the key sectors that is going to help us to achieve that strategic objective is precisely the visitors economy and tourism. I've been in this role since January 2017. It's amazing. It's been already 3.5 years. A lot of things have happened. And one thing for sure is that we've never been bored. We've been active and we've been, passionate to try to pursue and achieve economic development for Puerto Rico. And our public policy has been very simple. Essentially, we've been focusing on trying to attract foreign direct investment to Puerto Rico, promote exports, technology innovation, improve the ease of doing business and the climate of doing business in Puerto Rico. And with that in mind, attract new businesses, retain and expand the ones that we have, and very importantly, to grow and support small and medium enterprises in Puerto Rico. We have, from the beginning, 9 strategic sectors that we've been hoping to target key private investment and support exports. Of those 9 sectors that you can see in my slide, visitors economy is one of this important sector for Puerto Rico. And what we have been trying to do with public policy initiatives, the programs and the projects that we have been formulating and implementing for the past 3.5 years, is to do so, support tourism, the visitors economy, in a way that we can be competitive, like I said, promote innovation, and very importantly, also to support the development of the youth and the workforce of Puerto Rico. And like I said, we want to hit the mark in terms of the visitors economy, in terms of promoting private investment and exports. Many people maybe don't realize that tourism is a form of exports. And exports, by definition, bring new money to the economy, which is something that we need as a jurisdiction that wants to achieve economic development sustainable. Part of our key plan in terms of making this a reality and promote economic development through policy has been betting on key initiatives. As you can see, we've been very busy from trying to streamline processes associated with permitting, to also do the same thing with incentives, and also betting on 2 new organizations. One of them is called Invest Puerto Rico, which was created by law in 2017 to help us to attract new businesses. And of course, Discover Puerto Rico through Act 70, 2017, a very important bet, not only for the short term, but also for the medium and the long term, in order to market Puerto Rico in a consistent manner, in a way that is not interfere with political cycles, and that we can really provide continuity in terms of the strategic goals and strategic plans for the future. So for us, establishing Discover Puerto Rico has been one of the most fundamental initiatives associated with promoting not only economic development, but specifically, of course, the visitors economy and tourism. In addition to that, we have a regional focus for Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a small island, but is a sophisticated island, a sophisticated economy. And we have 78 municipalities. We have basically 5 major regions: north, south, east, west, and the mountains. And we also have the municipalities of Culebra and Vieques. So thinking about 100 by 35 miles, thinking about the island as a whole, we look at how can we promote and support economic growth through the different regions. As you can see here in this slide, we have different strategies and initiatives and projects to achieve that regional objectives. We have projects associated with energy and renewable energy, projects associated to promote export services, reconversion of brownfields for renewable energy, all the way to entertainment and tourism, including, for example, El Distrito, used to be known as District Life, Bahia Urbana, the redevelopment of the old naval-based Roosevelt Roads, medical tourism through the Dorado Beach Health, which is in alliance with the Johns Hopkins University, and the new film district to be also located in the Convention Center district. So we have these initiatives. Again, we want to impact Puerto Rico at the regional level so we can promote the creation and the retention of jobs and also investment in these key sectors. One important initiative that we were able to secure in a historic manner, for the first time, Puerto Rico now has the flexibility to attract activities and investments associated with the transfer of air cargo and international passengers. We never had this before. And actually, similar roadmap as Alaska, the Guam and Northern Mariana Islands, we were able to obtain from the U.S. Department of Transportation for the very first time in the history of Puerto Rico, this waiver, this authorization. What it's going to do is that through key investments and positioning these assets like Luis Muñoz Marin International Airport, Rafael Hernández International Airport in Aguadilla, and the Mercedita International Airport in Ponce, we want to position Puerto Rico to compete against jurisdictions like Dominican Republic, Colombia, and Panama to attract activities associated with the transfer of air cargo and international passengers. As a matter of fact, Puerto Rico is the only U.S. jurisdiction that not only has now the air cargo waiver, but also now has the international passenger waiver. We believe that this initiative that we are already working together with Discover Puerto Rico and Invest Puerto Rico and the federal government is going to help us in the years to come to position Puerto Rico as a hub for air cargo and international passengers. One key initiative that we started to formulate and finally implemented is the new incentives code. It was approved in July 2019, is Act 60. And what it does is that it basically puts all the key incentives laws and programs in one place in a way that is agile, that is simple, and is transparent. What we want to do is that we want to help the process of discovering investment opportunities in the island and the incentives that are available to support that sort of investment in areas such as exports, finance and insurance services, the visitors economy and tourism, manufacturing, infrastructure and green energy, agriculture, creative industries, entrepreneurship, opportunity zones, and others. It also includes the incentives for individuals, like, for example, individual investors and residents, medical professionals, scientists, and others related. So this is a very important step to reform the way we look at incentives and ensure that not only is transparent, but also provides the visibility that is needed to ensure that there is a return of investment of the use of the public funds and taxpayers' money to do it in a responsible way and attract investment and create jobs in these key areas. I would like to highlight a couple of changes that were included in Act 60 that is related somehow to the visitors economy and tourism. On one side, we were able to amend what used to be known as Act 20 of 2012, now part of the Incentives Code. So we can now include incentives associated with video games development, the creative industries, fantasy league, sports betting, esports, and so forth. That's very important. And also in the session associated with the visitors economy, we also expanded eligible businesses related to hotels, bed and breakfast, thematic parks, and related activities, sustainable tourism and ecotourism, the development administration of natural resources, and like I mentioned, also incentives to promote esports and fantasy leagues that are now part of what is known as Act 81 of 2019, which creates a new sports commission, and it's in charge now of promoting these emerging sectors associated with sports betting, online sports betting, esports, and fantasy leagues. We also have dedicated a lot of effort to support medical tourism. Medical tourism has many, many benefits to Puerto Rico in the form of bringing not only visitors to the island to look for specialized medical services, but it also helps tourism as abroad. It also helps, the healthcare system and the ecosystem in Puerto Rico. So we have done a number of things to trying to take advantage of this important sector for Puerto Rico. Now, we are already going through this pandemic, COVID-19. And before I go into where we are, I think it is important to revisit key data associated to the state of the economy prior to this pandemic. And the data that I'm showing right now is data that is being validated by third parties. We're talking about economists, independent economists. We're talking about the federal government, the Statistics Institute, and other third party not related to the government that has provided this data. And the important thing to say is that in 2019, prior to the earthquakes and prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, Puerto Rico was actually experiencing economic growth. 2019 actually saw our GDP to grow 1.2% and our gross national product, GNP, 1.5%. And this is despite of all the challenges that we're fully aware of. For example, passengers traffic increased for the first time in 3 years in 2019. Population decline stopped for the first time since 2006. Inflation was stable. Banks' assets were the highest since 2011. The December 2019 economic activity rate was the highest since December 2016. Treasury Department, Hacienda, tax collections grew 21%. And in terms of employment, this is very important. For the first time in 7 years, net employment increased in Puerto Rico. And let me just highlight some of the industry that show this net increase in employment, including, of course, tourism. Tourism showed the highest number of jobs since 2015. So between 2015 and 2019 showed the highest numbers of jobs compared to the previous highest number, which was 2015. And this is thanks, of course, to the incredible job that Discover Puerto Rico has done for the island. Of course, hotels remodeling, new hotels, groups, conventions, the cruise industry, medical tourism, music and entertainment, among others, that have contributed to actually have this outstanding number. Other sectors that also contributed to this important milestone include construction, the highest since 2015, financial activities, the highest numbers in jobs since 2012. Professional and business services has been increasing significantly for the past 3 years. Educational and health services, the highest since 2017. And manufacturing also reported the highest jobs in 2019 since 2014 thanks to the arrival of new businesses and expansions associated with bioscience, healthcare, and so forth. Now, of course, we are in the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we know, the government of Puerto Rico decided to establish a lockdown in March and a curfew in order to address and stop the pandemic. We know that what started as a health crisis and is still a public health crisis now is also becoming and has become an economic crisis. We've been diligent to try to use all the resources that we have at our disposal, both state and federal, to try to mitigate the impact to the economy and small businesses and the different sectors because of the pandemic. And of course, the measures that are necessary, painful but necessary, in order to stop this disease. So, for example, we established a new portal. It's called refuerzoeconomico.com. And through this portal, we were able to communicate and actually disbursed some of the state funding and assistance that was dedicated for small businesses. The initial assignment was for $60 million for small businesses with state fund, and it was done through refuerzoeconomico.com. We also managed to launch, using federal funds from the U.S. Department of Labor, a program to support also costs associated with COVID-19 for businesses. And also we were able to promote federal programs like the Small Business Administration Payroll Protection Program through refuerzoeconomico.com, among others. Later on, with the approval of the CARES Act and the assignment of $2.2 billion for the government of Puerto Rico, as you can see, there's been efforts associated to support the tourism sector through an assignment of $50 million. And also related to those that work independently, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and of course, there's money to establish a local type of payroll protection program that we hope to be launched through Huff this month in August. And there's also money for training and technical assistance for small businesses, as many other things that you can see in the slide. So there are resources. We're trying to work with the most sense of urgency to try to impact the economy and trying to mitigate the whole situation associated with pandemic COVID-19. Now, this is a very important data that I wanted to share with you. In terms of where we are today, this is the information that I got, the most recent information. And as you can see, these are basically 5 types of indicators or metrics that are extremely important to guide the decision process and the recommendations that are coming both from the Economic Task Force and also the Medical Task Force that will be under consideration and has been under consideration for the governor of Puerto Rico to make decisions associated with lockdown, with restrictions associated with the economy and curfew and what have you, in terms of making sure that we can win this battle. And as you can see, there is one indicator that is called the positivity index. This is one of the most important parameters because it basically creates a relationship between the amounts of molecular tests that are being done, and based on those tests, the number of people that have been tested positive of COVID-19. As you can see in this graph, and in order to establish the correlation, we need to do at least 4,000 tests on a daily basis. You can see that the very first phase of the reopening, which was on May 4th of 2020, we had that situation under control, as you can see in the graph. And that went through the second phase of the reopening, which was basically, I believe, May 26th. And then we went through the third phase, which started early June. And at that point in time, according to this positivity index curve, things were under, we could say, advocate measures and situation. According to the World Health Organization, we need to maintain this positivity index below 5%. So for that period, we were, I will say, kind of okay under the circumstances. When we started moving towards the fourth opening, And I have to say that there were two important events, Father's Day weekend and then the 4th of July weekend. We started to see an increase in this index. And it was a very concerning increase, to the point that right now, not only we're above the 5% index, but it's been in the trajectory that we just want to avoid. The below curve, you can see that is the endemic curve. And the same thing basically can be tell when you look at these numbers. We were in certain parameters under control for the most part between April, May, and June. And then all of a sudden, because of these events that I just mentioned, the curve started to go up. We also monitoring cumulative deaths. We are also monitoring COVID patients in ventilators and COVID patients in ICU beds. And so far, although the increase is not really good, as you can see in the graphs, in terms of capacity, the healthcare infrastructure and hospitals' capacity, it hasn't been yet compromised. We still have the capacity to manage the situation, but of course, as you can tell, there's no way we can allow that curve to continue going up. Otherwise, we're going to be in a situation that maybe extreme measures need to be considered. And we are doing everything that we can to ensure that we don't get to that point, at least in terms of recommending to the governor of Puerto Rico. So to finalize my participation, I want to basically end my part in a positive note. I want to highlight that, yes, this is something historical. We never faced such a challenge. And as you know, believe me, we've been facing challenges for the last couple of years, but this is very different. Not only we're battling an invisible enemy, but this is something that is worldwide. It's something that is affecting everything that we know across the globe. So we're not alone in this, from that perspective. But of course, in the case of Puerto Rico, we have our share of situations like the earthquakes, political crisis, storms, and what have you. And despite of that, I think that the resiliency of the people of Puerto Rico is just incredible. We have demonstrated that we can get through this kind of situation, and I'm sure that COVID-19 is not going to be the exception. We're going to make it happen. And I just want to share, some interesting numbers in terms of what do we see in the future in terms of investment, despite of this situation of COVID-19. So for example, in the tourism sector alone, there's at least, $1 billion worth of investments associated with the visitors economy. Opportunity zones, which we expect to have the new regulations in place next month. There's already at least $100 million worth of interest, and we know that number is going to go up. The film industry, we have a pipeline of at least close to $150 million. The manufacturing industry is close to $500 million. And this is not even counting the P3 projects and the projects that are going to be supported through CDBDR and FEMA and other forms of financing. Like I said, opportunity zones regulations should be fully approved and in place next month. The incentives code regulations, we are going to go through the public comments phase of hopefully in the next 2 weeks. And the sports betting, online sports betting regulations also highly expected to support not only online sports betting, fantasy leagues and esports and so forth. We hope also to begin the process of public comments next week. And you can see a share of recent announcements. So we are being busy. I mean, of course, we are battling COVID-19. We are working together with the private sector, the nonprofit, everybody, federal government, to educate that we never lower our guard. We need to use our mask. We need to keep the social distance. We need to have all these protocols in place. We need to ensure that everybody, individuals, businesses, the government, we are going to win this battle. But in the meantime, while we do that, there are good news. Recently, we announced a $200 million project for Roosevelt Roads, which is probably the most important project that has been announced for the old naval base. And this is going to be an incredible hotel that's going to be developing Roosevelt Roads. Recently, also, the iconic Hotel Intercontinental in Ponce is going to be redeveloped. And we see, entrepreneurship and innovation projects like Piloto 151, projects in the life science industry, emerging sectors like renewable energy and industrial hemp. As you can see, we've been very busy while we are, of course, battling this pandemic and ensuring public safety and public health. And we know that there is an impact to the economy. We are not going to rest until we're not only going to win this, but we're going to prepare Puerto Rico and position Puerto Rico to grow stronger than ever after this pandemic is over. So I want to thank you for this opportunity, and hopefully, this was valuable information for the tourism sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Lavoy. Thank you for joining us today and for offering such insightful information. Now, to offer additional updates and vital information to our industry, I'll leave you with Puerto Rico Tourism Company's Executive Director, Carla Campos.
Thank you, Xiomara, and hello to everyone watching. I hope that you find yourselves well, you and your teams. I will be sharing my screen to be able to go over our presentation, so that will be connected shortly. All right, I believe you can see my screen now. Great. Well, once again, hello. Thank you to Discover Puerto Rico, Brad, and the entire team for the opportunity. I have 10 minutes, so I'm about to stop my clock on that. I want to respect everyone's time, and the way that I envision that I could do that in this opportunity is to be able to provide guidance on some specific issues that we have been getting answer questions about. We really want to make sure that you have that information. We understand that you are making really hard decisions because of how the global pandemic has directly affected our global tourism industry, and more so how we're seeing that and feeling that in Puerto Rico. So we're cognizant about the fact that you're making really hard decisions. We really want to make sure that you have the most updated information in order to inform that decision-making process. Okay, what am I going to provide an overview of? I'm going to provide a glimpse into this, sort of as an introduction, because we will be hosting a webinar very soon to provide more information about all of these issues. The current executive order that was recently announced and came into effect at the beginning of this month, I will briefly talk about the destination-wide health and safety program and some notes about that I believe are important for you to have. In terms of the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which is part of that disbursement program that the Secretary went into, there's $50 million that are specifically for the tourism industry, and we've been working closely with AFAF and also with the Department of Treasury to be able to get that very much anticipated stimulus over to you. We've hosted a webinar about this, so I won't get into very much detail, and that webinar is available on our PRTC COVID portal. Also, we've gotten a lot of questions about inbound passenger risk, which we also covered last week in the message of the governor when the new executive order was announced, but I will briefly provide an intro to that. And where are we in terms of the phased recovery plan that we've presented to you and updated several times since the mid-March? So that being said, getting right to it, some things that are worthwhile to note, as you very well know, beaches remain closed for leisure at this point, only for physical exercising. This executive order, remember, has a duration of only 2 weeks. So we're in constant communication with the medical task force and also with the economic task force. I've personally been very involved recently with the Department of Health and also with the medical task force, because I believe the best way for them to make sound decisions as it relates to the tourism industry is actually having information at hand that is updated and paints a realistic scenario of what's going on. Hotel common areas are closed at the moment, even though they were open a little bit. And I think that the most important part is the questions we've been getting about short-term rentals. This specifically responds in this order, which is something new that you saw, in that the contact tracing teams at the Department of Health have been identifying that the population that is presenting the most risk to our population is those locals that are evidently not respecting the mandates of the executive order. In addition to that, there is a risk from passengers and inbound travel. However, that's not mostly leisure, as we discussed last week. That is mostly friends and family that are visiting, and we're seeing a great amount of those staying at short-term rentals. We really want to make sure that everyone that is staying on island is aware of what their obligations are. So that being said, reminding you of something that you already know, which is that all short-term rentals need to be registered as an innkeeper at the Puerto Rico Tourism Company, which means you have to be rightfully registered through our room tax division. If you are currently paying taxes through the platforms, through Airbnb, VRBO, it does not mean that you're exempt from this obligation. You have to be registered at the PRTC and on a monthly basis report your commercial operations, even if the platform is paying on your behalf. In addition to that, you are required to self-certify with our destination-wide health and safety program that specifically has a section for short-term rentals. That self-certification is mandatory. And the last thing is that you are only able to host within your property and the premises registered guests. Absolutely no social events, which is something that we had been identifying as something that was of risk. So these are really important to have, and that's basically the gist of what the executive order shows. Destination-wide health and safety program, we've been through this repeatedly, so I will just encourage you to go to prtc-covid19.com where you're able to get updated information. Specifically, look at that health and safety destination wide program and the guides that you will find on this page. It is important that everyone is self-certified, and do note that we are physically visiting all lodging properties and all endorsed tour operators to inspect and make sure that these requirements are being implemented. So that's the difference between both programs. Everyone needs to be self-certified. When you fill out that self-certification online, you get this certificate from us, which is the self-certification one in English and Spanish, which you can display. In addition to that, lodging properties are being inspected, and we are evaluating that those requirements are being met. So this is in addition to everything you're doing with OSHA. In terms of the coronavirus relief fund for the tourism industry, as most of you know, and we hosted in last week's webinar, we went about this in a way that would be easier for the proponents or the applicants to apply. Rather than you submitting a formal application and requesting the funds, we have gone on to identify who are eligible businesses and sort of pre-filtered you through the program. It is all being channeled through Hacienda, through the Department of Treasury, specifically through the SURI system. There are 1,200 eligible businesses that were calculated and whose incentives were calculated within the $50 million. Some people are concerned and they're thinking, well, if I haven't gotten my notification now, will that mean that because it's first come, first serve, I won't have access to the funds? That is not necessarily the case, because for this program, we distributed the $50 million amidst the 1,200 eligible businesses that we pre-identified. So these are lodging properties that are rightfully registered at the PRTC, excluding motels and short-term rentals. It includes the certified nautical tourism companies, the endorsed excursion companies, tour guides, travel agencies, and travel wholesalers. We recognize that the tourism value chain is a very ample one. So artisans, museums, taxi drivers, they are all extremely important to our tourism value chain. However, in this specific program, in this first round, they were not calculated as part of the program because we needed to have visibility on the entire universe. But I will encourage you to stay tuned, because since the very beginning, we've been thinking of a second phase with additional funding that will be on a first come, first served basis with a set amount of money where you would certify if you are if most of your business is tourism related. So that is in the works, but before we're able to get to that, we have to close the loop on this specific program. The first phase included 218 hotels which received their notification through SURI. 125 of the requests have been processed, which means that some hotels that got their notification haven't actually gone through the process. The second phase was activated yesterday, and that was another 229 tourism businesses. I will emphasize on this next point. The reason why there haven't been more businesses out of the 1,200 eligible businesses that have been notified through SURI is because when we required information, which was not an application, you will remember you got a link, many of the listings and many of the people that filled that information out did not fill it out correctly. So we asked that you provide the tax identification number you use to enter SURI and you use to manage your account in SURI. Unfortunately, many people gave us other numbers that are not the ones that you use for SURI, and those instructions were really clear in the questionnaire. In addition to that, a lot of people that inserted their tourism ID incorrectly, and it doesn't mean that you will not be eligible. You are still eligible and within that universe. It means that you will get another request from us asking for you to provide the information correctly. So that way we're able to pre-validate you, and the process in the Department of Treasury will be an extremely simple one. It really just takes a few minutes to complete because we've already pre-validated that you are an eligible business. So look out for the instructions to resubmit the required information, which you will get this week. That next phase, that phase 3, will include, we hope, the totality of the businesses that are eligible before we get into a next program, as I mentioned before, that is currently under consideration. Assessment of inbound passenger risk. In terms of tourism, we're aware of the fact that locally, many people associated the rise in COVID-related cases specifically with tourism. And I believe that there's nothing further from the truth. While we did see specific cases of tourists that were unaware or not respecting local laws, that's not the majority of the inbound travelers that arrived. Most people were actually respecting the executive order and aware of that, but we did have some outliers. However, the majority of inbound passengers, and let's talk about passengers because it's not necessarily tourists, are residents of the island or visiting friends and family. So that being said, it was important for us, for the medical task force, to be aware of this information in order for them to recommend policies that actually controlled the problem. So as you very well know, air access is very compressed right now. Many airlines have a lot of their fleet grounded, and that's just the reality of the international aviation sector. I won't get into this, but there has been proposals of us closing the airport or restricting access or imposing fees. None of that is something that the government of Puerto Rico is able to do because of these federal agencies that actually regulate air access. So that being said, all of those were contemplated. However, it is not within the realm of what the government of Puerto Rico can do. What we can do is inform the audience. And in that sense, I want to thank Discover Puerto Rico for helping us in that mission. And that coverage in mainstream media was actually able to get us to get the message to the audience. That being said, we've also been working with the airlines, all of whom have updated their travel advisories and information. And that way passengers that are booking, looking, or confirm their travels do know what is expected of them when they come to Puerto Rico. How was that executive order that was implemented at the beginning or mid-July affecting our inbound travelers? As you will see, there was a significant difference. So there was a reduction in 25% of inbound travelers the week of 19th of July versus previous week. Load factors reduced from 60 to 50%. Cancellations escalated 29% that week in comparison with previous weeks. Reservations also reduced 84%. And while traditionally these numbers wouldn't be something that we are proud of or something that we say with pride, the reality is that the resurgence of our sector and the reopening of our sector really depends on our ability to contain the health situation locally and for our medical system to be stable. So at this point in time, our call to action is this is not the time to travel. However, we really want you to come back when we're ready to receive you. And this is not the case of Puerto Rico. You probably saw a lot of coverage over the past few days about how many destinations in the US are suffering through the same thing. As you will see, inbound traffic also shifted. So there's more people leaving than they are entering. And those who are entering, what's really important is that it's mostly residents and visiting friends and family. And how is that reflected in the risk of infection locally? Well, the reality is that out of the cases that the Department of Health tracked that had to do with travelers, 60 of them were attributed to residents that traveled, while only 19 of them were attributed to visitors that traveled. And within those visitors, including friends and family, that are the ones that have the most contact with our local population when they do travel. There's a big chunk there that is still being assessed by the Department of Health, but these numbers allow us to have initial information and proportional information about what's going on in order for us to inform decision making. In addition to that, those that are traveling, based on the data we're collecting from the travel declaration forms, are mostly staying for more than 5 days. So that's another hint that we're probably talking about people that have ties to our local population, and they are staying in residences mostly or in short-term rentals. So with that, and with that information, what we're currently doing is reassessing our phased recovery strategy. As you know, we've been updating this recovery strategy since mid-March with recommendations for reopening, but the situation nationally has changed drastically. The pace with which science has evolved to be able to attend to the pandemic has also not been as agile as we expected. So that, partnered with several other things that have gone on in the past few months, have required that we reassess that phased recovery plan. Remember that we're not only talking about the COVID situation, we are talking about a social crisis in mainland US with national civic unrest. We're talking about economic impact. And we're cognizant about the fact that Puerto Rico will rebound strongly. We just want to make sure we're compiling this data correctly, having an idea of what are the issues that need to be attended to so that we can correctly map them. Here you have not just a grim situation, but these are the issues that we are evaluating and attending. So these issues are the ones we need answers to in order for us to update this phased recovery plan. To each of these things, we are drafting solutions or proposals that will allow us to make sure that with that updated phased recovery plan, we're able to sustain the development of it. So we know that the recovery, as has been shared by other national and international organizations, will be a lengthy one, but there are opportunities in the short term. As soon as we're able to get our local population moving a lot more internally, we're definitely going to focus strongly on incentivizing local tourism. It worked for us last month. You all saw the effects of that in your business. We really want to make sure we do that responsibly as soon as we're able to do so. So last but not least, there's information and data coming in at every day. Today, we got notification that the CDC will extend the no sale order for cruising until October 31st. So we see these moving targets changing, and this is a situation really that has no precedent. But do know that we are evaluating all of these things responsibly together with Discover Puerto Rico, correctly informing the task forces about how this is affecting our tourism industry, and asking for support throughout the whole process. So we're with you. We read your emails, we read your messages, we answer your calls. These are all things that we are currently working on, and we've seen many agencies been very responsive to our asks and our recommendations. We're sure that's going to be the case moving forward. So thank you so much for having us, and we will be hosting a follow-up webinar where we will deep dive into all of these things very much closer to when the next executive order will be announced, because we do need clarity on how these next 7 days that are very crucial for the epidemic locally, how that will unfold in order for us to get better visibility of what we can expect as of as of August 15th, and then plan from there forward. So look out for that webinar. We will deep dive into all of these things. Thank you to Brad and the entire team, and available for questions.
Thank you, Carla, Brad, and Secretary LaBoy for all this information and insight. We are covering a lot of ground today, so before we continue with the rest of our speakers, we want to take a moment and address some questions that are coming up on the Q&A box. So I'll start with you, Secretary LaBoy. We have a question about the incentives you were speaking about earlier. Are those available to local businesses or only businesses coming from other territories?
Yes, that is a very good question. And I think this is important to clarify that all of those incentives that I mentioned are not only for those investments or businesses that come from abroad, but also for local companies. So when you look at the incentives code, maybe with the exception, with the exception of the individual residents, individual investors, which used to be known as Act 22 of 2012, except that one, the rest of the incentives, including the visitors economy, including agriculture, green energy, including manufacturing, including export services, entrepreneurship, opportunity zones, all of those, any local company, any local investor, any local business can qualify as long as the activity is eligible under the law.
Thank you very much, Secretary LaBoy. Carla, I have a question for you. I've submitted my self-certification online, but I have not received the seal nor the confirmation. Who should I reach out to?
Xiomara, I'm typing the email so that you can see it on screen, and I will be sharing my screen with you a minute. So if you want to ask another question, and simultaneously I'll be sharing my screen with that contact. Just so you know, there are two processes: the self-certification, so you submit that online, we receive it, and we send you a digital certificate. So if you have not sent the digital certificates, which have been sent out for the majority, if not all, of the businesses, then please reach out to us. I will be sharing my screen in a minute so that you can reach out to the correct people.
Perfect. As Carla shares her screen, we are going to get ready to move forward. This is all the questions that we have in this section. So as soon as we get the email from Carla, please take that down so you can direct all your questions through that email, and the people at PRTC will be able to assist you with that.
I will use this opportunity because I am reading some of the comments to address some concerns. There's, in terms of, are we promoting ourselves as being open? And I think Brad can also speak with this when we have beaches and hotel common areas that are closed. Evidently, that is not a current call to action, but as soon as we're able to open some of those common areas, which we expect will happen in the upcoming executive order or the following one, based on how the pandemic transpires in Puerto Rico, as soon as that happens, we will start with promoting internal tourism and working closely with Discover Puerto Rico about how to correctly do it to generate demand from outside of Puerto Rico. But in the short term, internal tourism will be key. There's also concerns about tourists that we're seeing on island, and I think evidently, when we were talking about who are the visitors that are arriving to Puerto Rico, we did talk about the fact that it is mostly residents that are using our airport. In addition to that, it is visiting friends and family who are essentially tourists because they are coming for travel. This is not their primary place of residence. And we are seeing people that are actually traveling against all recommendations, from CDC recommendations to local government recommendations. Who are these people? We really need to think about the fact that the majority of the population is risk adverse or they don't want to travel at this point in time. So we do have people that are taking risks in traveling, even though it goes against all the guidance we're providing. So we're also counting on local police to be able to enforce it. And the governor was clear about the fact that she was ordering or recommending or asking for the Department of Justice to have a better way to enforce that residents and visitors abide by local regulations. We will probably be seeing more people imprisoned for not meeting with the requirements that are imposed. And we are aware of the fact that a lot of our industry stakeholders are actually helping us in this effort and correctly communicating to their clients that this is probably not the best place to travel, but we're happy to greet everyone at another point in time.
Thank you very much, Carla. I believe we have the email.
Yeah, these are the emails. Leslie Diaz, leslie.diaz@tourism.pr.gov, anna.velez@tourism.pr.gov. Feel free to write to them. They're great members of our team, and they are happy to help you if you haven't received your self-certification. So write those email down or screenshot this. And we hope that you're able to contact us, and we're happy to attend to that.
Thank you, Carla. And again, thank you, Secretary LaBoy, for joining us today. Now, to hear more about the current industry trends and changes, let's welcome Discover Puerto Rico's Research Analytics Director, Alicia Valentine.
Xiomara, it is certainly a strange time to be a destination market researcher. When you've spent 20 years looking at the numbers of how a DMO grows an industry and is an important part of a community's economy, it's tough to see numbers that put the brakes on this role. But it's already becoming evident that Discover Puerto Rico's response to the pullback of the opening is having an effect. When we've looked at similar numbers in recent months to this chart, it's been about how Puerto Rico's numbers have been strikingly different to the rest of the US. In the early days of the pandemic, this was due to the island's quick and definitive measures to issue stay-at-home orders, causing a more dramatic drop in occupancy than the rest of the US. A month ago, it was about how sharply occupancy was increasing after restrictions were eased and locals were filling rooms. But today, it's about hitting the brakes on reopening and the constriction of occupancy, something that hasn't yet happened on the mainland. In the last 2 weeks, occupancy has fallen 22 points, which is a decline of 48% in room nights. And we are definitely seeing a lot of movement in lodging demand. For the most part, that involves cancellations in the short term. For the most current reporting week, hotels saw an 18% decline in leisure bookings from the previous week, which means rather than having any pickups for the week, there were actually cancellations. And though much more modest than we've been seeing, there do continue to be future bookings for later in August and beyond. we've seen there is significant pent-up demand. So it seems consumers continue to hold out hope they will be able to travel, making reservations for future months they know they can cancel if necessary. And when we look at what's happened in the rental market, there's been a dramatic shift. Rentals were actually booking higher than in 2019, something no other competitor was seeing. But in just a single week, this current week, for the week of August 3rd, rental demand went from 16% higher than a year ago to 25% lower than a year ago. So certainly, consumers are getting the message that the island has pulled back its opening. And though cases on the mainland have continued to rise, there has been a trending decline in deaths from COVID-19. Even so, upwards of 60% of consumers now anticipate the situation to get worse, nearly where we were at the beginning of the pandemic. And with this growing concern, there has been an increase in consumers who perceive travel as unsafe. Again, 60% of consumers view travel activities as unsafe, up from a low nearly 2 months ago. And even with this growing unease, there are certainly consumers who remain willing to travel, even through the rest of the calendar year. And as we've seen in past reviews of forecasting, some of the highest expectations for travel yet this year were pinned on October. However, we're now seeing more consumers say it will be 2021 before they're ready to travel. And when we narrow that down even further for the kind of trip that Puerto Rico requires, it's not just 2021, but even the latter half of that year before many consumers expect to resume air travel. That's certainly not to say that all is lost until then. More than a third of consumers are willing to get on a plane before the end of the year. Another 20% expect to do so between January and April 2021. But a staggered willingness of consumers ready to take the kind of trip that Puerto Rico requires is what can support the industry, while at the same time keeping guests and residents safe. And visitors are willing to do the things to ensure safety, which in turn will keep residents safe. Consumers say they're not just willing to wear masks and follow social distancing guidelines, but they're happy to see destinations that have such policies in place. Much of the media has focused on Americans' reluctance to wear masks. However, there are clear differences in demographics of who's willing to wear one. In a recent Gallup survey conducted at the beginning of July, it's educated and female consumers who are typically Discover Puerto Rico's target audience that are considerably more likely to wear masks. Leisure travel has received much of the attention throughout the pandemic, especially in recent days with the rollback of the island's opening. But meetings and events remain an important component of the travel industry in Puerto Rico, with Discover Puerto Rico's sales efforts generating over 200 events in the 2019-20 fiscal year. But with the rise of coronavirus, many live in-person events have either been canceled, postponed, or moved to virtual meetings. In a survey with over 300 meeting planners across the US by destination analysts, the average planner has had more than 10 events impacted by COVID-19 through cancellations or postponements. But encouraging for Puerto Rico is that planners anticipate that sports groups would be among the first types of events to return to meeting in person. For that 2019-20 fiscal year, Discover Puerto Rico's sales efforts generated the largest portion of leads in the sports and recreation market segment. Our Chief Sales Officer, Ed Carey, and his team will walk through what's happening in the meetings and convention side shortly. But first, we'll get an update from Chief Marketing Officer, Leah Chandler.
Thank you, Alicia. What a difference a month makes. Today, I'm going to share a quick snapshot of our current marketing efforts and then ask Nate Huff from Miles Partnership to take a deeper dive into how consumers' attitudes towards safety are driving their willingness to consider destinations. He'll also walk through how that data is changing who we're going to target moving forward as we prepare to re-enter the media marketplace. So as I said, what a difference a month makes. In our last industry update on July 1st, we shared the good news that we were moving into phase 3 of our recovery plan as we prepared for the reopening of inbound tourism. Here we are a month later, sharing that we have rolled back to phase 2 of the recovery plan. In phase 2, 2.0, the focus again becomes risk aversion, health and safety. A curfew remains in place and elements of lockdown are in effect once again. And perhaps the most significant difference between the first activation of phase 2 and where we are today is the governor's directive for Discover Puerto Rico to cease all marketing related to driving visitation to the island. This development requires another major pivot. Our condensed consumer-friendly version of the visitor health and safety guidelines continue to evolve as new information is released. Available in English and Spanish, this document is available on discoverpuertorico.com and on the industry portal. We continue working with Aerostar to amplify the current procedures and health and safety measures being executed at the airport. This includes a Protocol 1-sheeter available in English and Spanish, along with a step-by-step video that explains the new requirements. We're going to be adding a link to the video in the Q&A box shortly for you to view later. The document you see here was developed to compare various island opening dates and health and safety guidelines in correlation to Puerto Rico's plans. This document is available on our industry portal if you want to take a closer look. Given direct-to-consumer marketing activities are currently paused, communications efforts remain as critical as ever. After the announcement of stricter regulations made by the governor of Puerto Rico, we immediately pivoted our communications to relay that we are encouraging essential travel only, with a continued focus on our health and safety measures. On July 20th, we shared our updated travel advisory messaging and revised collateral, which included revised mandates and language around essential travel. Our advisory was updated again this past weekend to incorporate changes from last week's executive order. Our partners at Ketchum went back to the press, who originally covered our July 15th opening date, and secured coverage with the new essential travel only message. Travel, lifestyle, hard news, MICE, all of those reporters have been inundated with this type of information as other cities, states, and countries roll back their reopening phases too. Notwithstanding those realities, as you can see here, the changes to articles were almost immediate. This outreach and exchange with reporters is, of course, ongoing. To help mitigate this health threat as COVID-19 cases on the island rise, we continue reaching out to the press to educate them about our safety regulations, mandates, guidelines, and airport protocol, so they can relay the updated information to their followers, readers, and viewers. Our stern tone with media has been applied in order to convey the serious steps being taken to safeguard our island. While an official reopening date for inbound tourism has not been determined, we are keeping abreast of updates in the situation on the island and in the United States that will influence island-wide orders. When it comes to earned media efforts, we're focused on tried and true tactics that communicate essential travel only. We're doing this in a variety of ways, such as participating in multiple rounds of live interviews with media, as well as sharing our statements and key messages broadly. Additionally, while people may not be able to travel to the island right now, the destination can show up in a positive light within articles that inspire and help travelers dream about their future trips to Puerto Rico. These are parallel work streams. We continue to pursue evergreen stories. These primarily focus on lifestyle media outlets where we can highlight the beauty Puerto Rico offers and keep the destination top of mind when people begin to make their travel plans. Here are a couple examples of that type of coverage. Even though paid marketing is paused, we all know news chatter doesn't stop. We need to stay on course and proactively communicate the latest updates to ensure we remain part of the conversation and the consideration set for future travel. In the past 4 months, creative messaging continues to evolve to meet the changing circumstances. As we pivoted away from beautiful scenic images designed to lure visitors to the island, we replaced them with messages meant to detract visitation. The visuals that accompany these messages are meant to be simple, educational, and informative. We have created a consistent look and feel to the visuals that help us communicate everything from social distancing and mask requirements to airport protocols and beach closures. Going against everything that is natural to tourism marketers, we are amplifying messaging that will reduce visitation as we do our part to protect the island and safeguard the visitor economy for the future. And it's working. Data from Smith Travel Research shows that hotel demand for the week ending July 26 fell 48% from the 2 weeks earlier, while AirDNA reports that independent rental bookings declined 12.9% for the same period. In the most recent week, leisure travel bookings declined 18% from the week prior. And Aerostar reports that arriving passengers into SJU fell 28.6% the week ending August 2nd compared to the timeframe in mid-July. These key performance indicators reveal that the message about Puerto Rico postponing its opening to tourists is being delivered. Media is a strong lever for us to pull as we work to slow the number of arriving passengers. The majority of our media investment has been paused. Current active placements focus on educating consumers on guidelines and restrictions. These low-level investments include search engine marketing and paid social, which drive to the travel advisory. As Nate will share with you shortly, when planning to re-enter the media marketplace as restrictions begin to lift, it's going to be critical that we search for travelers who profile as responsible and conscientious, those who are willing to follow local rules and give consideration to the destination they're visiting. And social media continues to be a vital channel for us to disseminate our messaging. To align with the overall strategy, we shifted our social media messaging and tone to focus on educating travelers about current mandates. We are publishing information regarding travel advisories, airport protocols, testing requirements, curfews, face coverings throughout the entire island. Additionally, we are running social ads targeting users who live on the mainland but are currently on the island and diaspora who we know are making up the lion's share of arriving passengers. We're seeing increased metrics across the board in response to this educational messaging. Facebook page interactions are up by 71%, and Twitter impressions are up by 191%. Responses and comments are mixed. Many visitors are expressing frustration and disappointment, but locals are largely expressing appreciation for the educational messaging. And here are just a few examples of the posts that have been published over the last few weeks. The travel advisory on discoverpuertorico.com continues to serve as our main source of information to educate consumers on the restrictions in place on the island. Since launching the advisory on March 9th, the page has had nearly 690,000 page views and an average time spent on the page of 7 minutes and 48 seconds. There have been 538,000 entrances to the site through the travel advisory, which is credit to the SEO on the page. We also continue to update the health and safety landing pages with the most up-to-date information for both leisure travelers and MICE. Since launching in June, this page has had more than 42,000 page views and an average time spent on the page of 3 minutes and 18 seconds. In addition to the landing pages, we're using our personalized content tool to serve fly-in messages around the site to further educate consumers. Examples of that creative can be seen here. And while we're only encouraging essential travel right now, when it comes to the MICE segment, the marketing we do now doesn't impact next week or next month, but next year and beyond. It's important that we continue promoting our destination to meeting planners to generate future leads and ensure that our pipeline stays intact in 2021 and beyond. Recent research conducted by destination analysts confirms these booking patterns. MICE has always had a longer booking window than individual travelers, but with COVID-19 as an added factor, some windows have been further extended, with almost 48% believing live meetings will return in the first half of 2021, and 39% feeling they will return during the last half of 2021. At this time, the right message for this segment is it's time to plan for those planners who are researching destinations for live meetings in future years. In conclusion, while destinations around the US are facing significant uncertainty, the focus of your DMO's marketing efforts today rests firmly in responsibility. We will continue this messaging strategy as we do our part to mitigate the threat of this pandemic on our island. And now, Ed Carey, our Chief Sales Officer, will share a brief update on our team's sales efforts.
Great. Well, thank you, Leah, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I also wanted to briefly say thank you to those customer advisory board members that have joined us this afternoon. We appreciate your ongoing support and guidance and look forward to seeing you in person soon. As Leah mentioned a few slides back, the sales department is focused on establishing a base for the future and staying ahead of our competitors as the market begins to reemerge. This may seem obvious to some of you, but we think it's worth repeating because with all the great efforts all of us have made to control the spread of the virus and ensure our safety protocols are well established, we're going to be very well positioned when this is over. So it's really important to continue to communicate to our buyers and partners, and the Discover Puerto Rico team has a plan and is ready to adapt to whatever comes our way. So I thought I would take just a brief moment to talk a bit about what we encountered last year during the period of July through December, which is obviously the same time frame we're currently working in. Although it is not represented on this slide, generally 25% of our definite business was confirmed and turned definite and operated in the period from July through December. However, what this slide does show is the vast majority, or 97% of the new leads we receive during the coming 6 months will be looking at the next year and beyond. This is how we build the base of business, which later begins to turn definite as we follow up and eventually bring them to the island. And as we have pointed out in previous presentations, our pipeline of active leads has suffered because of the crisis. We're roughly 28% down to where we were last year. So now is clearly the time to stay focused on rebuilding that pipeline, and that's what we intend to do. The good news is that we are starting to see more consistent lead volume in recent weeks. While it is still substantially down to last year, it is encouraging. And we have been nonstop in presenting to meeting planners, third parties, and key strategic partners every week. We've completed nearly 150 webinars, presentations, and virtual trade shows in both the leisure and MICE segments since the restriction began in mid-March. Our marketing and sales teams have worked together to develop a consistent and professional image and great multimedia content for all of our virtual engagements. And we're always prepared to hit the road for live events when restrictions are lifted, and obviously as the budget permits. In addition to the ongoing webinars and presentations, we're also well positioned this summer, late summer, with many of the most important trade shows that will be critical to maintain our presence in the marketplace. As you see, most of these events remain virtual throughout the summer. However, as we get into the early fall months, the intent for the moment is to attend these events in person, and we will be prepared to do so. And the same applies in the leisure segment. At the moment, we are focused on education, but we have kept the lines of communications open with dozens of important travel trade organizations and thousands of travel advisors. And we will be ready to deliver your promotions both virtually and in person when the time is right. And lastly, we've shifted dates a bit on our virtual destination showcase or FAM events and have worked with many of our hotel partners on this call to settle on August 27th and September 10th for our hotel and El Distrito focused experiences. Stay tuned as well for revised dates on our leisure focused FAM event. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Xiomara.
Thank you, Ed. Now I'll introduce you to our last speaker for the day, Miles Partnership Senior Vice President, Nate Huff. Welcome, Nate.
Thank you, Xiomara. It's my pleasure to be here joining you on behalf of the DMO today. I've worked closely with the team at Discover Puerto Rico over the last 2+ years, helping to reposition the brand, establish a world-class digital presence, and drive visitation to the island. If you would have told me in March of this year, after navigating 2 years of hurricane recovery, unrest, and seismic events, that the next 5 to 6 months would be the most challenging times the island's tourism economy would have ever faced, I wouldn't have believed you. But here we are. On March 10th of this year, Naomi Campbell made headlines and frankly generated a lot of laughs when she showed up at LAX wearing a hand-assembled hazmat suit for her flight. 4.5 months later, this is unfortunately no longer a joke. Vending machines are selling personal protective equipment at airports, and companies are racing to create spacesuit-like equipment to provide consumers with the confidence to begin traveling by air once again. Miles Partnership works with more than 100 different destinations around the United States, and frankly, the complete lack of a coordinated national response to the COVID-19 pandemic has meant that each of those destinations and the related DMOs are navigating a unique set of local and state or territory level guidelines, or in some cases, lack of guidelines. In fact, in some of our destinations, including the state I reside in, lack of state level guidelines has even forced national retailers to take matters into their own hands and set the type of policy normally reserved for government. Puerto Rico has in many ways been more proactive and coordinated in its response than the other destinations we work in. The fact that it was the first US entity to enact a shelter-in-place order was covered from the mainland all the way to Indonesia, and Discover Puerto Rico has been recognized repeatedly both within the industry and through national media coverage for its own strategic and nimble response to an ever-changing crisis and changing consumer sentiments toward travel. Today, I want to expand on what Alicia addressed earlier, talk briefly about how consumers' attitudes towards safety are driving their willingness to consider destinations, as well as their willingness to travel, and then walk through how that data is changing who we will be targeting moving forward with digital media, as well as how the messaging will need to be evolving in real time as we go. As a quick reminder, as of right now, per the governor's orders, Discover Puerto Rico is not running any paid promotions actively inviting visitors to the island. We're only helping communicate visitor safety protocols that have been in place to help create that consumer confidence when the time is right to travel. So let's start with the recent shift in traveler sentiment. Puerto Rico is not alone in its decision to roll back or to pause reopening plans. Based on the surge nationwide, and unfortunately particularly focused in many of Puerto Rico's top visitor markets, many destinations have been forced into delaying openings for visitors. Not surprisingly, the surge has also impacted travelers' confidence, with almost 8 in 10 travelers saying they are changing their travel plans in the next 6 months due to COVID-19, and almost half of those saying they've canceled their trip completely and a quarter switching from fly to drive markets. Tracked over time, we can really see the impact the surge of cases has had, particularly on the last month or so. In mid-June, confidence was at its highest since the start of the pandemic in the US. Less than half of people surveyed agreed with the statement that they would avoid travel until the crisis was over, and more than 30% strongly disagreed. As of a few weeks ago, that's changed. More than 62% are saying that they will avoid travel, and only 18% saying it won't significantly impact their plans. The surge has also, understandably, impacted local resident sentiment on opening up their communities to visitors. Despite the severe economic crises created by lack of tourism, fear of outsiders bringing the virus into their communities has also increased substantially over the last 45 days. Only about 1/3 of locals nationwide currently support opening their communities up to visitors at this time. Even more telling, 4 times as many residents say they don't want visitors coming to their community than those who say they are ready to welcome visitors. This is not a Puerto Rico only sentiment. All over the country and world, there's a debate raging within destinations about balancing community health and safety with the need for local economies to recover as quickly as possible. Island destinations like Hawaii, Puerto Rico face particularly tough challenges. And unfortunately, as we have seen, some visitors aren't helping make the case. Confrontations, some of them deadly, have erupted all over the country between people with very different ideas around their own personal responsibilities tied to community safety. Unfortunately, Puerto Rico has not been immune to this conflict. And in just the last few weeks, there have been multiple incidents between visitors and locals tied to compliance or lack of compliance with the island safety laws. But I do want to share some good news. These visitors are in the minority nationwide. In all, close to 80% of Americans believe we should be wearing masks in public, and only 7% actively disagree with that statement. A majority, 57%, even support fining people for non-compliance, with less than 20% actively disagreeing with that approach. More importantly, from a future travel perspective, 2/3 of people said it would make them happy to know a destination was requiring visitors and residents to wear face coverings in public, and less than 10% had a negative view of mask requirements. Specific to island destinations, travelers are also largely unfazed by the prospect of mandatory pre-trip testing. Nearly 75% said they would be willing to take the test, and only 12% said a mandatory pre-arrival test would make a destination less attractive, while 4 times as many people said it would actually make the destination more appealing. This provides us an opportunity from both a knowledge and a social responsibility perspective to shift Discover Puerto Rico's media targeting in a new direction. So let's talk about that. The consumer media targets for Discover Puerto Rico have been built on detailed audience research from the very beginning. That research has identified the demographic, geographic, and interest-motivated travelers most likely to be influenced to choose Puerto Rico over competing destinations. But that doesn't mean it has stayed the same the entire time. In fact, as recently as June, targeting was updated to create a specific focus on the diaspora market that was responsible for the bulk of limited visitation in the late spring and early summer. We were also forced to re-examine how we prioritize source markets in this process. Traditionally, airline lift, affinity for the destination, and spend were the primary factors. In late May, we introduced and later refined a new market prioritization matrix that also factored in total COVID cases and, more importantly, the trailing 2-week total of new cases from source markets. This has meant that even with the limited spending in place prior to the governor's orders, that just in the matter of the last several weeks prior to that, Discover Puerto Rico had shifted media out of New York in favor of Florida, and then quickly readjusted back toward a Northeastern emphasis as the epidemic had been subdued in the Northeast, while unfortunately expanding in the Southeast. So while we've come up with a solution for quickly reacting to source market changes and shifting market efforts accordingly, we also need to look at how we refine who from each of those markets we want to bring to the island. In short, how do we find these people? The good news is the data is out there. It's everywhere. It hasn't traditionally been used by DMOs for media targeting purposes, but it fits neatly into the existing data points such as gender, age, income, and education. That said, we've traditionally tried to stay apolitical when it comes to audience targeting for travel. Regardless of one's political affiliations or views, if they have the disposable income to travel, are interested in the type of product our destination offers, and are in the right source market, they are a target customer. In the current climate, however, ignoring the data that clearly shows a link between political ideologies and a willingness to embrace safe travel practices is not something we can ignore. In order to find that balance between driving visitation and economic recovery while protecting our island's population, we have to acknowledge some of the undeniable data points around who is more likely to embrace safe travel practices and adjust our media accordingly. It's not making decisions based on any particular ideology or political leaning, to be clear, but rather using the data to understand what that indicates about actions those beliefs tend to support. On behalf of Discover Puerto Rico, Miles is applying these data points across existing and prospective media partners. Programmatic digital advertising partners like Centro are able to target based on the type of content users consume and their interests, such as progressive causes. With a social partner like Share This, we can look at the exact type of media and content that users are sharing and target both them and their friends. With a media partner like Amazon, we can retarget those who are actively searching and purchasing PPE like hand sanitizers and masks. And on search, we are able to target people who are specifically looking for safe destinations. These additional targeting parameters are now being applied to our research-based media targets to come up with what we call the responsible traveler segment, which is the one we will focus on once we're able to begin proactively marketing the destination for safe travel once again. Of course, what we message is as important as who we message to. And right now, that message is really focused in on 3 areas, and it's being distributed, as Leah described, primarily across owned, social, and earned channels. Our goals are first and foremost to provide clarity for all travelers that are coming or thinking of coming, even if we aren't actively inviting them. The second is to demonstrate compassion and care in our messaging, both for locals and businesses, as well as visitors. And the third is to support the community, both by prioritizing health and safety in our messaging, and also by providing resources for the industry to take advantage of. On discoverpuertorico.com, we are providing up-to-the-minute information on visitor health and safety guidelines, and this includes detailed info, updated very frequently based on evolving protocols, related to what travelers should expect when arriving at the airport and expectations for safety precautions they will need to embrace across the island. Beyond protocols and guidelines, we're also communicating the steps the various segments of the visitor economy, from transportation to restaurants to hotels and short-term rentals, are taking to keep both guests and employees safe during these challenging times. We're pushing this message out via social to our followers to reinforce best practices related to health and safety, and to drive visitors to the complete set of guidelines on the website. And in doing this, as you can see from the text here, we're asking our visitors not just to follow the rules and regulation, but to embrace their responsibility to be part of the community's collective effort to stop the spread of the virus. And finally, Discover Puerto Rico is looking to create value in its messaging by providing you, the industry, ongoing updates and resources to navigate these unprecedented times. I encourage everyone watching and listening who is not already subscribed to Discover Puerto Rico's industry newsletters to subscribe, and please tell your industry colleagues to subscribe as well. And please take advantage of industry webinars like the ones one Miles was able to offer on behalf of the DMO recently about using digital tools to inspire confidence in potential visitors. Muchas gracias for the opportunity to be with you today, and I look forward to seeing everyone in person when the time is right. Now I'll turn it back over to Xiomara.
Thank you, Nate, and thanks to all of our panelists for such great information today. We have some questions in the Q&A box, and we want to answer as many questions as we can. But before we get started, I want to let you know that we will not be able to offer the translation feature during the Q&A session. However, next week, we will send the Q&A document with any unanswered questions and their corresponding answers in English and Spanish, as well as a link to a recording to this webinar so you can replay it at your convenience. My email is also on the screen, so if you have questions or need any additional information, please feel free to reach out to me via email. A nuestros amigos que están utilizando nuestro servicio de traducción, No vamos a poder ofrecer la función de subtítulos en esta sección. Sin embargo, la próxima semana les haremos llegar las preguntas sin responder junto a las respuestas correspondientes en inglés y en español, al igual que la grabación de este seminario web. Además de esto, mi correo electrónico está en pantalla. Pueden anotarlo y si tienen dudas, preguntas o necesitan alguna información adicional, pueden comunicarse conmigo a través del mismo. Now let's get started with the questions. One of the questions that we have here, let me pull this up. Leah, I believe that this is a question you can answer. How can we address through good communication to the residents of Puerto Rico that tourism is not the main contributor to virus spread through data?
So I think there's a couple opportunities for us as the destination marketing organization, of course, noting that that is not the DMO's main charge. So all of our marketing and sales efforts are primarily focused to the mainland and international markets to receive inbound tourism. Most of the local communication piece falls under PRTC. That said, we know that there are certainly local residents who are following our social channels on Twitter, on Discover Puerto Rico's channels, on Instagram and Facebook. We know because they're commenting there, so they're definitely looking to the social channels and other owned channels like our website. So I think the travel advisory on our website right now is one of the main channels that is being used to communicate in the most simple terms what the changes to each of the executive orders is. So we're going to continue to update that on a regular basis. But in terms of using paid resources to do that, it unfortunately does not fall under our purview. We can't use the dollars set aside for Discover Puerto Rico to market and implement communications programs on the island. So we'll continue to use our own platforms at this point, but in terms of doing paid promotions, it really doesn't fall under the DMO.
Thank you, Leah. We have information in regards to cancellations due to the pandemic, but do we have any specific information in regards to destination weddings and cancellations on the island?
We do not track destination wedding cancellations on the island. Ed may have some information from a leisure standpoint just as to what we have heard anecdotally from some of our private partners, but it's not something that we track as an ongoing KPI.
Thank you, Leah. Brad, this question is for you. How has this shift in closing tourism impacted the support that the DMO is receiving? What can the industry partners do to continue to support the organization and ensure that the DMO is well positioned for marketing the island when it's ready? And also, if you can share some information if you've had to make any staff cuts.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that underscores the real mission and essence of Discover Puerto Rico. We are, at our most basic level, a public-private partnership, and we don't take the opportunity to say this enough, but our success only comes through your success. There's no DMO that's successful if its local tourism industry is not. So we certainly understand that and appreciate the willingness of all of our partners to work with and through your DMO. Back in March, we recognized that the COVID crisis was going to impact our funding levels. Even though none of us thought that we would be dealing with it at this point, it wasn't hard to anticipate the financial impact when you consider how we're funded. And for those that aren't familiar with this, Discover Puerto Rico's primary funding source is essentially 1/3 of the taxes collected from visitors who stay at various lodging properties, hotels, paradors, and independent rentals. So roughly 1/3 of those dollars are dedicated to off-island promotion, knowing that for many of our lodging properties, their business was going to take a downturn. We recognized that we had to take quick, decisive action. So we did a number of things earlier this year to reduce the level of spending as much as by 60% month over month. Some of those included cuts in personnel expenses and also operating expenses. We shifted, like many of you, to only essential expenditures. We also put the pause button on paid promotion and many industry promotions that we would otherwise have been contributing to. And then we made a number of changes to contractual relationships, in some cases reducing or deferring services, in other cases simply negotiating for advantageous payment terms. All of that allowed us to reduce our expenditures month over month by about 60%. And at the same time, we work with our partners in local government to secure additional funding for this last fiscal year, which ended in June, that helped to carry us through and give us some reserves going into this fiscal year. So much like your business, when the top line goes down, you have to cut expenses. But we knew that because there wouldn't be additional revenues coming in for quite a while, that we had to look to other sources. And I will say we received a lot of assistance and support from the Department of Economic Development, from the tourism company, from Huff, and also the Fiscal Oversight Management Board, who all made that possible. That's the way we've been able to maintain this base level of operations and basic level of promotion for the time being. I should also mention that we were one of the very few DMOs in the United States to receive a payroll protection program loan, which will be forgiven. And that loan was almost $1 million. So it allowed us to pay for a lot of our salaries and expenses that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to pay for. Let me quickly get to the second part of your question, which I think is really, really important. And that is, what can we do together to not simply support the DMO, but rather to support our industry? First and foremost, I'll tie back to something that Nate just mentioned. Take advantage of all of the resources that we have, whether it's the training webinars, the research newsletters, the industry updates and other materials, as well as our social media channels. We would encourage each and every business participating today to share and reshare the social media information that we create. And that's truly a win-win for all of us. It will not only help us expand our reach on this very critical, timely messaging, it also helps to make sure that your business is aligned with the messaging, not simply from the DMO's perspective, but the island in general. And of course, our consumers benefit by knowing more information and being kept up to date. The second thing I would encourage each of you to do, if you're not already doing this, is make sure that you're communicating efficiently and consistently with your customer base. While Discover Puerto Rico is the main messenger off island for our tourism industry, there is no better relationship than that relationship you have with past customers. And as we think about recovery in tourism, it's going to happen in steps and phases. And one of the key audiences are those past customers and past clients that will help not only resurrect the tourism industry, but refer business to us and also amplify our message. So make certain that you're using the information that comes out of our social media, our travel advisory, and whatever you have to keep your customers informed. And then last but certainly not least, I would tell you that each of you are perhaps far more influential than you realize. There is no better voice for our local government officials, whether elected or appointed, to hear from than local business people. You're the ones generating taxes and creating jobs. And when you think about the tourism industry, pre-COVID, pre-seismic activity, on an annual basis, you were delivering $700 million worth of taxes every year. And only about 4% of that goes to promotion. So what does that tell us? That when tourism is cranking, everybody on our island throughout Puerto Rico benefits. So make sure to share with any of your connections in government, whether elected officials or appointed officials, whether at the local level like a mayor or at the island-wide level like a House member or a senator, the importance of investing in promotion. While many people recognize the importance of our industry, they don't often realize that, much like agriculture, we have to plant that promotional seed today to reap the benefits down the road. If we continue to work together and amplify this message at the right time, in the right way, with the efficiency and collaboration that we've all contributed to, we'll be able to get tourism back to where we all want it to be soon.
Thank you, Brad. We have time for a couple more questions. And I know that we have Hector Ortiz from Aerostar with us. And this question, it will be for you, Hector. Since we've seen a lot of the airlines offering very deeply discounted rates on their fares, do we foresee this from changing in the near future?
So, hey, hi everybody. Thank you for having us. Jessica is also online from the Aerostar team. It has been a great presentation, as a couple of you have said in the comments, so thank you. I honestly would have to get back to you on that precise fact, but I could say that it is a possibility that that trend might continue. I mean, I know that the state of affairs is ongoing, as we have said, and I think that it is no less different for the airlines. So I would say that we could expect that, but I could get back to you on that one to confirm. Probably with Guillermo, we could confirm that.
Thank you, Hector. I believe we have another question, but Secretary LaVoigt's it had to jump off, so we'll get you information on that. It's about short-term rentals and the incentives. We'll make sure to get you that information. And I believe that's all the questions we have for today. So like I said, we'll send you a recording of the webinar with the questions in English and Spanish, so you can replay at your convenience. And we'll be sending you information about our next industry update in September. We'll see you on the next one.